you studied the myths of creation. This
Yes.
whole book, right? So this whole book is are notes of your studies and things that you researched about, and so you did study the myths of creation. You do say that the study of basic themes inherent to each myth cycle better reveal them as appear constantly and consistently in all creation myths.
I would say that the one constant is the difficulty that people themselves have in being able to express that as something completely unique to their culture, because by and large these things are quite universal.
Right.
And although we perceive them differently in ourselves, they still always come back to the premise of we have come from somewhere other. How do we understand that other? And it's generally in terms of how they view their own culture that's then reflected back into it's that each culture tries to discover for themselves a unique way of expressing themselves, but ultimately they fail, because no matter how much you define separate cultures and the way that you view the divine through the way you view yourself and the way your people live, there is one underlying premise of the divine that is a mystery, and it is in seeking that mystery that we all come to the conclusion that there can only be a creation from the other, and the way we try to find that other is in the way we look to ourselves, and so that you are looking through a fractured glass that ultimately only has one backside to it. So although there are all these prisms, they ultimately combine into the one source. So all of the cultural aspects really still reflect the one method of creation. However, they may try to dress it up slightly differently, be that as twins, or be it from an egg or from a nothingness. Ultimately, behind all of those things is a something that generated all of those things.
You do. You talk a little bit about several archetypal characters that appear consistently, right? You have the creator or creatix. You have the trickster. You have the first man and first woman, and the flood hero. Can you tell us a little bit more about them, and how? I mean, we can see by just looking at them that they are, and we can place them sometimes in various, more than one culture. But do you think that they are these all constant? I mean, you see that, you say that, but is it really universal?
I think the way that they are portrayed represents different stages of our understanding. Certainly, one culture can move on from one method of understanding to another relatively quickly, whereas others may harbor one view for millennia. So the trickster is one that comes and goes quite regularly in different cultures, will always appear at some point, because we people go through a flux in our evolution, and we need something to explain that. So we call on different archetypes at different times to explain where we are in our understanding. So yes, you're quite right. Those boundaries, those particular archetypes will change their presence and will change the way that we interact with them and our understanding of our being. And so you will get a quite sophisticated society perhaps reaching the stage where it thinks, okay, we're created from nothing. There's an ex nihilo going on here. There was nothing, and then there was something that we can't understand. It's very philosophical. And then you'll get a very, very earthy culture that says, well, we see that we can replicate, we procreate, so obviously this is what the gods did, and they made us. And then you'll get another one coming on and say, yeah, but there's a spanner in the works, isn't there? There's more than God. There's something else going on. There's a trickster element that seems to need to create a chaotic element for us to understand ourselves and our place within God's regime. And he can create things that can make us analyze ourselves in a different way. And so he's a creator of sorts. and he creates his beings that are there to test us. So it's where we are in our own philosophy and belief systems that allow us to turn to these different aspects.
There is another thing that it's quite interesting, because I really do I believe this as well. It's just contemplating myths and history in general in terms of mythology and the myths of creation, which is quite interesting. We can see the tapestry, can't we, of the evolution of man, theologically speaking, and how the understanding. It's really interesting. Now, you talk also about essential to weaving, and you talk about weaving and spindle, right? There is this essential to the weaving art, and the spindle is recognizable as historical emblem of security. What is the relationship between weaving and spinning within the craft, do you think?
The relationship is one of fate. Fate is ultimately the one binding thing to which we all turn and understand. It's the way the world works. It's the way it operates. It's the dynamic between what we want, what we get, and what is dealt to us that we don't want. And by weaving as an art, we can contemplate the way that the world might have been woven or spun into being. I mean, another one of the beautiful creation myths is how Freya weaves and spins the stars and the clouds, and all of that generates life as it filters down. And she weaves fate for everyone. She spins out what is happening through the clouds, the winds. That brings all of the omens and the divinationary methods that we can for trying to understand our place in fate and how to foresee it, anticipate it, and work with it. So all of the analogies of spinning and weaving, everything that can be bound, is something that is inherent within spellcraft, but it is inherent within our trying to mediate our place of being in the world we wish to create for ourselves.
Roy Bowers or Robert Cochrane and even John Jones talk about the Hound. How does the Hound manifest through the group mind?
The Hound is the guardian spirit, and when each of us are present in the compass and we come together, because we are interconnected in mind through consciousness with each other, and through the egregore itself, which is the mind soul of the people, we have inherently within us that part which is a guardian, and that part which is of us which is the shield, that stands outside of any place we work. Therefore, when we are together, we combine as that Hound. We generate, if you like, that guardian spirit which becomes the Hound. But it is more than the sum of our parts. It is in part the egregore itself, which will withdraw that ability to guard ourselves if it feels the work wasn't sufficient. This is why we say the Hound will turn his nose up at the cake. The cake is the work that we have done, the thing that we have created. And if it wasn't good, if it's a poor cake, then the Hound turns up his nose and says, no, I'm not satisfied with that. You've got to keep on working because I'm not going until you've finished. So in effect, it's guiding and guarding us as much as everything else beyond us. It's a two-way entity. It's more than like Kerubis in hell. It is literally something that is part of us and part of the other. So it's an interweaving of a spirit entity that is generated and created by ourselves, around ourselves, into and beyond the other, to assist us in manufacturing our work.
You talk about the primal law, and in here you say, how wonderful is this gift of grace. Some are born knowing and others die seeking. Some are born certain and others die perplexed. Some are simply aware and others have yet to become. We each perceive best that view which accommodates our present. The future is spun from the weave of that discovery. Now, does this summarize our journey into this world, do you think?
I would think, I would say that it does. To a great extent, it is the journey that we seek to the other side that we can find in life, and most certainly the other side in death. And I feel that if we reach that term where we don't feel that we've learned everything, then we feel very, very perplexed as to what was the purpose. What did we do? Why did we do this? Whereas if you are inherently aware in a state that is just there without having to work for it, you know your purpose in life. You go through it confident, not questioning. You just do what you feel is necessary to do. And how do you acquire that state? It's a gift of grace. It isn't something you just click on one day and there it is. It's either there or it isn't. And that's not to say an understanding cannot be reached, but it may be a few lifetimes before eventually you get to the stage where you are born knowing. And there's a lot of, as Bowers would say, tears before bedtime before you get to that stage.
You said our conjunction in truth is a convocation of love and beauty, and that we are the world's soul. How is this so, and why?
That's a good one. The convocation of love and beauty is the point at which our soul meets the world soul. And if we aspire through mysticism and the art of mediation, through being able to sacrifice ourselves truly to that point of being, then we achieve a convocation of love and beauty. It is a point of being which we understand grace, we feel that grace, and at that point we have entered the world soul. We have become part of that. It isn't, again, a constant state. It could occur in a fraction. I think, again, Cochrane was one that said he thought he'd grasped that 3 times in his life but lost it, because it's not something you can hang on to, and life is such a thing that it encroaches even the ability to think or contemplate such a thing. So yes, it is pure love and pure beauty in the ultimate sense of the awesomeness that beauty can represent in its purity.
And we are the world soul?
We are, all of us, yes. It's just becoming aware of it. That's the thing. We are, all of us, there. Many of us never understand that or witness it. But we cannot not be a part of that world soul.
You talk about she who is the womb and the tomb. This concept is very interesting because it permeates a lot of other traditions as well. What is your understanding of this?
That she who births us also destroys us. There cannot be one without the other. They are both sides of the same coin. And I think in the most raw and understanding of all cultures and societies, this is understood as an inherent premise, that she who gives life is also that which takes it. And that in itself is the most awesome beauty. It comes back to that state of ambivalence that just simply is everything. It wears death and life as the same mask.
Now, one of the concepts that I was very taken by, it was the one that her name is no name. And this, you say, and you say in the book, you said she cannot be limited to a name. And this is quite interesting because this is present, for instance, in Portugal and as well as, for instance, in Bulgaria, where they do know who she is. They have a clear idea who she is and what she does, but they don't have a name for her. It's her, right? So in Portugal, they call it the White Lady, and that's all they say, and that's it. In Bulgaria, they don't even have a name. Sometimes they call it the Mother, but that's basically it. There's no name. And I found that very interesting, this notion of we can't limit it to a name. Many people and many cultures gave her many names. You do mention the Great Mother of folk memory. Mothers of all mothers, for instance, you say, and as in the poem of Roy Bowers. So why do you think that is important? Do you feel that there is any reason why in very wide cultures, for instance, like Bulgaria and Portugal, there is no specific name?
Yes, I do. I think that in Old Europe, as Maria Gimbutas would call it, Old Europe, it's a very prehistoric society, and they very much feel part of the earth. It's not as it is in the New World that has a different concept. This old world primitive society, this belief that everything is of the earth and goes and returns to it, is of a greater sentience. It is an overwhelming sentience that saturates everything from the earth to the sky, to the stars, to people, to animals. Everything has an animistic presence, and it is so great and so abundant, yet so treacherous, that you cannot put any one explanation upon that, because the moment you do it, it is limited to that understanding and aspect. And for something that encompassing, you know that what it is, but you simply cannot give it a name or description, because it defies every description you can put on it, because it's something else as well. Which again, it comes back to, it's not this, not that, it's neti, it's all of it and nothing. It goes beyond our comprehension for explanation, because we are not finite enough to be infinite, and this being is infinite, so there are infinite descriptions that we couldn't begin to articulate.
Thou who created the heavens and the earth, order from chaos and time from eternity, I pray to thee. Thou who listened to our deepest voice, thou who inspires our inherited wisdom, thou who shine. It's always thou, isn't it? So it's really a very beautiful. This is a poem by Roy Bowers in the book as well, who actually is a prayer that expresses these concepts intrinsic to the mythos of the clan. It really is very interesting because it's always thou, and it doesn't matter because it really encompasses. It's an essence, isn't it? You would think.
It is, but it's in that particular prayer, it's speaking to a particular avenue of the ultimate, of the all. It's understanding and reaching into all those aspects, but it's saying, but I understand you because of my ancestry. I understand your presence because of the people who have gone before me. So I know that you are with me in my sight, in my breath, in my speech, in my being, because of all those other people that have gone before me. I know you are with me. And so it is reaching out to that ultimate through the presence of one's own ancestral beings.
One of the things that I really thought that it was very interesting was the connection with the wind spirits. She is Providence, right? And so why the connect? It's very interesting because in the Iberian Peninsula, for instance, you have her connected with water, and it's all about water. Often enough, the priestess, if there is any contact with her, she will cry, and that is a sign. There is tears, so tears, water, so that would be it. But here you talk about the wind spirits, so it's a different take on it. What is the role of she in the craft, and why is it that she is connected with all wind spirits?
Again, the wind spirits are something that bring all manner of seasons, all manner of beneficence, all manner of plague. So everything that we see in life that is a gift of fate for weal or woe is brought to us through the winds. It can bring the damp rains, it can bring a monsoon, it can bring a hurricane. All of these things run through the spectrum of what is good for us and what is not.
Mm-hmm.
So whichever direction that they come from as well, there are particular archetypes that those wind spirits can be seen to act through. They bring those qualities, those virtues through those winds. So you know what's coming from whichever direction, whether it's going to be good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's going to benefit you or not. Whether it's a gift that you'll appreciate or not. So yes, the wind spirits in the craft are things that, again, as part of the divinatory arts, we can see, we can feel and sense and understand. So it's all part of reading the omens. So in the craft, the winds are very important because they're one of the major sources that we can see and feel and understand on that level.
Mm-hmm.
And because of everything else that they bring, that they are connected to, and that goes behind them in history, the directions of the winds with the stars, particular stars that rise and set, that again have their own myths and mythologies, there is such a depth that we can look into and immediately understand, and you've got a complete background almost at your fingertips there, just from the direction of the wind.
Bauer said, Robert Cochrane, that there cannot be any religion higher than truth. Now, this is very significant for me because I think it is very on point. Why does it feed the demon and the saint at the same time, you think?
Because something that pure doesn't have a subjectivity. Something that true is completely ambivalent. So if you are drawing from a source of ambivalence, you draw it into yourself. It is feeding the saint and the demon with the same milk. They both draw from the same well. They're both looking at the same wind spirits, the ancestors that also ride those winds. They both see the same thing. It is how it colours that glass that is yourself that decides whether it is poison or whether it is the elixir of life, because it comes to you as the same force. So truth has to be beyond anything that's subjective. It has to be beyond anything we can perceive and make a judgment of, because it has to be something that has a purity beyond that.
Another thing that you talk about is kingship and the notion of kingship, and you say that it's a child of the people. The child is born of and by the people it represents. How does this representation relates with the craft itself and the clan in particular?
I would say that in common with many ideas within occultism in general, you have the child of art, you have the magical child, and all of these things are seen to have been created by the unit that births it, that it is involved with. It is something that's generated by a particular group of people. So in craft or occult terms, those people, through whatever need they may have, will generate something that is of the other, that protects them, that engrosses them within their magic, and which involves them in their magic. And that is seen as the magical child of art. And the child, therefore, that we see as being birthed from the people is the one that has the closest density to spirit. And I mean that in that literal sense. It is the density of spirit. It is almost pure. So therefore, that child who is seen in charge, who is the Drighten Lord, the spirit that guides the people, is the child. It is obviously a person that embodies that and imbues that and wears that mantle, but they are in essence the child, because they are the most pure source, closest to spirit.
You talk about the wanderer, the feminine twin of Metatron, right? So,
oh yeah,
yes. Who is this wanderer, and what is its role in the craft?
Okay. Sandalphon is perceived as the manifest form of the Metatron, in the same way, I suppose, that you have the animistic presence of deity and present and inherent within the world. You have Sophia, you have the fallen Sophia. You have a strong female animistic presence on the world, in the world, that is the world soul. And that is seen as a wandering spirit, as the way Sophia is, in the way that she has to move through all of mankind, assisting them to bring them back home. So she is the wanderer, and she works through all the peoples of all the lands of all the worlds to bring them home. So that is her job. So she moves through spirit and through life, showing people the way. And her sign is the shoe. And this is why the magical shoe is such an interesting myth in folklore. Within all cultures, there is something incredibly magical about a shoe. From Freemasonry, where you're unshod, to Cinderella, there are all these aspects of what is and what is not a shoe, and why it should or should not be worn. And it all comes back down to the hell shoe that is given as a passage to the next world, as it were, where she's taking you home. It is that ultimate gift. Okay, you have lived your life. You actually followed the path. You walked your path in a true way. You now have your shoe to take you over the barbs and thorns of the moon, to take you through to the castle where you will be home. You first have to walk over the thorns of the moon that Cain lays down. It's all myth, but it's all things that you have to face, that your deeds are at the end of your life, all the thorns that you've created. If you've managed to do those thorns with good deeds, for instance, they all weave the straps for your slipper.
Who is the man on the moon, or the man in the moon, I should say?
That is Cain. In the craft, that's generally seen as Cain.
Yes.
Because as the father of the people, in the way that he was the first wanderer. So you've got he who is the first wanderer, and she who is the wandering. He is assigned to the moon to guard that as a sort of a halfway house. And he is there to show us that there is always going to be a reflection of her beauty and her guardian. He is the Rex Nemorensis, if you like, the guardian of her place. So as guardian there, he watches her through the reflection of her mirror, which is the moon. So he's forever seeing her down here, but he can't see her. He's separated from her. They only will join together ultimately again when all of humankind has trod roughshod over those thorns and returned home. So they are separated, and we are their progeny that need to come together in the understanding that we need to walk a true path. So the Cain as the man in the moon is the ultimate person who showed us in a way that there is an essence that is so destructive that it can be just a pain, just everything that's a shard, that's sharp in life, that is a hazard, that is something to be watchful and mindful over. So he is there to sort of show you that there is those things in life, but they can all be overcome. Fate is seen as the instrument of those shards. And in a moment we can change our fate. In an instant we can change everything, for weal or woe. We can make the wrong decision and everything changes. We could make the right decision and everything changes. And so those thorns are his to bear, so that we can see, yes, you're exiled from humanity if you make the wrong decision. But also, it isn't permanent. There is no exile that is permanent. Everything, every fate, no matter how bad, can be overcome. It just takes time. And Moon is a symbol of time, but she is a symbol of eternity. So he exists in time and she is eternity. So we are caught between those two fires, the great light and the absolute light. And that mirror is the light back to earth that reflects that ideology that we can see through the mirror, through to the dark and through to the ultimate light of infinity. And along that pathway there will be thorns, but there will be jewels, there will be beauty. We just have to weave our own fate and fortune along as we understand it.
You talk about prima materia, Adam, and the transformation through sacrifice. Now, one of the things that I find very interesting is sacrifice and the definition of sacrifice, which you have. You say that sacrifice is the giving up of something precious as an offering to the source. To offer something of little or no value dishonors your gods. It is a spirituality powerful tool for bringing you closer to them. What is the role of sacrifice in the craft, do you think? In general terms, of course, there are specific sacrifices that you do, but how necessary is it? I
think it's essential, but I think it's very, very personal too. I think every individual has to decide for themselves how much they're prepared to give up in their own lives to advance one way or another, because we are all seeking to move along, whether that be an evolution in spirit or in the material sense, and they need not be separated or distinct, but sacrifices in one form or another have to be made, and they can range from the simple a gift and offering to something that you have to give of yourself, and that can be a complete gift of self or a partial gift of self, in the same way that you can give a bunch of flowers but you wouldn't give a whole meadow. It's always proportional, and the time that we give to other people and to our gods is proportional to what we wish to give. The sacrifice is the idea that you are giving something that will make whatever it is you're giving holy, because you're wishing it, you're willing it. It is that sacrifice is a very peculiar thing, because many people believe it is the thing that is given up that is the sacrifice. The sacrifice is the giving. It is the act of giving something that makes what you're giving holy and fit, a sacred thing. Without that willingness to give, it is not a sacred thing. In other words, it is something that cannot be taken. It cannot be forcibly removed from you. It cannot be extracted. Your life can't be taken and given as a sacrifice, because it is then not holy. It is not sacred. It is only made sacred by your gift of it. So I think, in past times when people have said these people have been sacrificed, I I personally don't believe that can be possible, because they wouldn't be a sacred or fit gift if they had been taken against their wish.
There is this man, right? That is, it was probably
The Lindo man.
The Lindo man, yes. It was probably a sacrifice, but a willing one. That was done. You said that let's talk a little bit of taboo and what taboo is. But before we go there, I would like to call upon Cain as part of this sacrifice. How do you think that he ties in with this idea of sacrifice and his example? How can we take that in?
Well, Cain, as an elder brother, would be seen as the one who could officiate as a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, his role with his brother has often been misunderstood. Again, I don't particularly feel that there was a conflict there in the way that it's been portrayed. I think his role is that there is something that must be given and something that must be done. It, again, is expressing a need, but I think that some people might perceive the slaying of his brother as an essential sacrifice. I'm not altogether convinced on that one myself, but it is, if you're going to follow that myth to its ultimate conclusion that is presented in the Abrahamic faith, then I would say yes, he had to have been a willing sacrifice. And the taboo in modern society is that you do not slay your brother, as a commandment from that. But understood in its true context, you're slaying a part of yourself. As a philosophical understanding of that, you are overcoming that part of yourself, which is something that you need to give to the gods.
Mm-hmm.
It is part of yourself you're sloughing away. So in that essence, Cain and his brother are one. Cain and Abel are not distinct people.
Mm-hmm.
They are one being that is giving of himself, an aspect of himself that the gods need, that he feels they need. And therefore you can sacrifice elements of the self. And these, again, are myths and stories that have become very much convoluted and misunderstood over time. There are sacrifices that are made, as we've just explained, of people, but there would have to be willing ones as a gift to God. If it was taken, then it wouldn't be a fit gift for God. And when they were all about making their individual offerings, and that was the whole point, and given that Cain is the eldest brother and would be the officiating priest, his gifts and his offerings wouldn't be of something where he would have to take the life of something against its will. So he is clearly giving something of himself in the tiniest sense, in the sense that you have always these magical twins, always these magical elements, which are the self and the other self, the bits of us that are spiritual that we don't always understand, that we often consider to be our twin soul. So I think that in this aspect, that is what is happening there. And those things have become taboo because we don't understand them. And things we often don't understand, we assign a taboo to it. It becomes something that is almost unspoken, and therefore to break taboos in a society, you have to break those laws, those rules, because that is the only way you can be seen to expand your own boundaries. If you can't find another way, you break a boundary, you break a taboo, you trespass on a given law in the hope that you can understand it.
Now, you said that matters of taboo are something that you have researched and seeking clues onto dark interiors of custom, and as we just heard you say, what have you discovered that correlates with taboo, with that are seen today, that we still have a strong taboo, and perhaps it's even preventing us to realize that taboo, it's probably there for us to deconstruct and understand deeper meanings within it?
I would say that probably the greatest taboo on the world at the moment is that of a moral turpitude, if you like. It's almost as if there are these moral impositions that are the laws of man, and we perceive them as laws of God. And I think that is the transgression. That is the greatest taboo. That dynamic, that conflict there between the law of man and the law of God. Man imposes the law as if it were the law of God, but it is not. It is the law of man. We cannot know the laws of God, if there are any at all. Who is to say that there is a law applied to the divine? We can only understand the truth of the divine if we are even remotely lucky. But we impose these divine laws and say they are the laws of the divine. They are not. They are laws of man. And to break those, to understand the divine, is one of the greatest deconstructions that we can undertake. And I think at that point we then understand it's not the law of the divine we are trying to deconstruct. It's man's laws, ourselves, the way we apply those and understand them as rules to live by. And if we have understood them correctly, then the deconstructions will allow us to understand the divine that much better. If the deconstruction was not successful, then all we have is guilt and fear that we've broken a taboo.
And the taboo continues.
And the taboo continues.
When the cauldron is empty, stillness remains. And stillness is the fulcrum of all desire. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
The world itself is seen as something that is constantly in flux. It is moving. It is generating. Creation is never still. The way that the world destroys itself is never still. It's an ongoing cycle. And therefore, it is a constant. For it to ever be nothing and a stillness and no longer a constant means that everything that rules in time has ceased to be. We have become in an eternal place that time does not rule. Therefore, we've surpassed and overcome this level of being and understanding. But while wherever we are subject to it on this plane in life, ruled by fate, there has to be movement in the cauldron. We can only cease it in death. We can only cease it in eternity. Life is flux.
You say in the book, in one of the texts in the book about grace through gnosis, you say, when we fall, whom do we fail? Whom do we fail?
It's a good question. I think everyone should ask themselves.
Yes.
Because it's easy for me to say who I think I would fail, but I think it's something that is so profound. It is something I think everyone should explore for themselves. But certainly, I think it's probably the last thing that's on everyone's list.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So, we are certainly responsible for all actions. So it is a welcome paradigm shift within the concept of a belief that we do make a distinction and shift away from the overbearing, guilt-laden oppression laid upon us for too long. Can you elaborate on this and in the law, what this and then you go and you say we make of all we are given what we will, taken it and then do what is necessary. And if we give to the gods or the divine all of ourselves, then truly what I or we have, we hold.
This law is considered the witch law of the craft, in that it is again an ambivalent expression of how to overcome our own subjectivity to our world and how to overcome the fate that befalls us. in that if we give ourselves totally up to that ambivalence, we will only ever act in the rightness of things. The rightness of things means that at that time there is no right or wrong, there is purely what is necessary. And sometimes you have to do what could be seen as the bad thing for the right reason, or the right thing for the wrong reason. And it has to be done. And it is a way of understanding that there is a reciprocity in the divine that allows for this. There is an understanding that because you have given in that truth and acted in the rightness of things, then everything that is needed will be given in return. And it's if you like, a form of covenant that is undertaken when we are inducted into the clan, into the people of Goda, that we accept this premise first and foremost as almost a duty to the self and to the divine, to always find the right way of acting, to always understand that there are choices, but there's only one choice out of all of the choices presented to us that would be the right thing to do, which in most cases will always be the hardest and require the greatest sacrifice. And that will allow us to be in a place where we are, if you like, held within a divine sense of duty, which means that we are overcoming fate because we are dealing with things that are presented to us. We are not sitting on the fence. We are actively moving to change things by doing the right thing, the needful thing. And that will often, as I say, encounter doing something that many people would consider not very good, not very nice. But they are not moralistic choices. They are judgment on what is right at that time, what is needful to be done to overcome the fate that you are faced with, to face it down, to make sure that you can move forward away from the fate and stasis, because stasis is seen as something that you're in a living death, and that is also when the cauldron is still, when you are not moving in your life, when you are in the proverbial rut, when you are proverbially in the barrel where people, shoot ducks. It is, you've nowhere to go. You're just going round and round in circles, ever decreasing circles toward that numbness that most people exist and call life, that is purely existence. There is no life in existence. You have to understand the pattern of life and how it interweaves with the divine, and to move forward into a greater sense of the divine, you have to be able to manipulate your fate, which means overcoming those boundaries and barriers that are presented. So the law is there to encourage that movement into the right thing.
Hopefully wisdom will help you a little bit in the way.
Absolutely.